Arcade Heroes.
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and for this quick bite of news, or Newsbytes as I like to call them, I'm going to cover a couple of items, or 3 items really, that are just quick, interesting things from the arcade industry. A couple of these I've already mentioned on the blog, but one of them I haven't yet, and so I'll start with that one, and then we'll get into the other stuff that you can already read on ArcadeHeroes.com if you like. So the first one is that the book Atari Inc. Business is Fun is getting a second edition. Now, if you're not familiar with what this book is, the first edition was released back in 2012, written by Kurt Vendel and Marty Goldberg. And if you've never read it, it's one of the most incredible histories of a video game company that I've ever read. It's practically the Atari Bible. I mean, and the thing is as big as a Bible, several hundred pages, almost 1,000 pages or somewhere around there in length. I did review it when it was released back in 2012 for the 40th anniversary of Atari. But Marty Goldberg, who is one of the co-authors as mentioned, he announced on the Atari Museum Facebook page that he is working on a second edition in celebration of Atari's 50th anniversary. Now, unfortunately, his other co-author, Kurt Vendel, who was a major Atari historian, collected a lot of things from Atari's history, and spoke with many, many people who worked at the company, passed away a couple of years ago. I believe it was from heart problems, and so he won't be able to go in on that work. But Marty is working diligently to make this second edition the definitive edition. Now, that was a little problem with the first edition in that where they designed it or they wanted to release it in time for the 40th anniversary, they had to rush it a little bit, so as you get further along in the book, there was a lot of typos that popped up. It was still readable, but it was just unfortunately due to the rush that they had to go through to get it out in time, caused that issue. And so the second edition should avoid that problem, and Marty did state on his Facebook posts, rather lengthy, so I'm not going to read it here, just show it on the screen, but he's not holding himself to an exact date. He wants to try and get it done in time for the Atari Alumni annual meeting, and that's something that a lot of ex-Atarian people who worked for the company get together once a year, outside of the pandemic, of course, but I guess they are planning on doing one of these this year, and kind of like a class reunion where they get together, share stories, and all that. And so he hopes to have it done for that event in the fall, but he's not going to guarantee it because he wants to make sure that it gets done right this time. But in the post, he also mentions that he's going to be adding additional information, additional details, new stories, and that's one of the great things about it is him and Kurt, they interviewed so many people from Atari's past that it really presents you a step-by-step history through the company. But even then, you could tell there were things that were missing, stories that were missing, but a lot of the stuff that's in there, it's just really very fascinating. You get to learn about things like the development of all these big games, Pong, Asteroids, Centipede, etc., as well as the arcade side as well as the home side. But of course, thanks to the arcade side, that's where I can talk about this on an arcade channel. But definitely, if you're interested in video games and video game history at all, I would highly, highly recommend this book. Of course, we'll want to wait for the second edition to come out when it does. And when it does, I'll also be happy to review it. I know down the road he's going to be doing another book, or he had been working with Kurt on another book called Atari Inc. Business is War. And that's because Business is Fun only covers the period of like 1968 or 69 through 1984, when Warner had sold Atari off to the Tramiel family. And then Business is War was going to cover the Tramiel era, which was like 1984 through 1996 or so. And so I guess that one's been put on indefinite hold. Of course, personally, as semi-professional writer, I wouldn't mind helping them out with that, but either way, I guess that'll come later on. But hopefully that book would also have some information on Atari games as well, but I don't know for sure. Anyways, moving on from them, we go to Sega. And of course, Sega's been around for a little bit longer than Atari, but they weren't the ones that developed the video arcade game. They developed electromechanical games prior to 1972, but after Atari came out with Pong, they came out with Pongtron, their clone of Pong. And many other companies came out with Pong clones as well. But either way, the Sega had been in the news a lot lately, and I even did a video about this, where all these headlines blasted across the internet saying Sega's exiting the arcade business after 56 years or whatever. And as I tried to mention in that video, is Sega really exiting the arcade business? The answer is no, they're not. And that really was a very broad brush used to paint a far more complicated situation. But I guess people just read headlines these days and don't really read details. So again, to reemphasize that, I guess Sega decided to announce a couple of games. Now, these are not games developed by Sega Japan. They are developed by Sega's Western side. You could call it Sega Amusements International. But still, they are new arcade games. They'll have the Sega name on them, and they're going to be released sometime this year. A release date was not given for either one, but they will be coming. And I will likely see these at the Amusement Expo 2022 trade show coming up in March in Las Vegas. Now, for the first game, Jumanji, this game has actually been in development hell for a while, since 2017 at least, possibly 2016. I first mentioned this on the blog when it was being developed by Team Play, and they had licensed it from Sony Pictures, and it was based on the first reboot Jumanji movie. And here are some pictures that I found from the original location test, or one of the original location tests, where Team Play had put the game into a cabinet that was similar to another Redemption game that they released called Spins Ahoy, and that also had some kind of spinner controller on it. But what's interesting is that if you look closely at these photos, you'll notice that the Team Play version from 5 years ago and the Sega version don't seem terribly different. Now, of course, I have no idea how Team Play's software game really played. I do believe it was going to involve mini games, from what I recall hearing when I asked the Team Play guys about it at a trade show once. But again, I never got to see the game, and I never got to play it, so I'm not 100% sure how similar it is. But still, where you can see here that it keeps certain ideas in place, such as 4 players and a kind of spinner controller device. Now, with what Sega announced today, the spinner is interesting. It's a hybrid of a spinner or a knob and a button. And again, that does look like what was seen on the Team Play version, but maybe not quite as stark as the Team Play version had, like that green crystal thing jutting out further, whereas Sega's version is just a typical large arcade button. But anyways, in the Sega version that's going to come out, you play up to 12 different mini games, and some of them will use the spinner, some of them will just use the button in different ways, and that makes it a little more interesting than your typical Redemption game. I mean, one reason why I don't personally like Redemption games, for one, I've just never cared about them. They were just so shallow, and I just didn't really care about prizes and whatnot. I just wanted to play games, get a high score, enjoy myself playing those, whatever. This I mean, most redemption games are very, very shallow, and some of them only last a few seconds. And that's one thing I just don't care about. I mean, when people complain about games taking your money, redemption games are ones that eat your money a lot faster than normal video games. Most video arcade games can last at least a few minutes, and possibly longer, depending on how much emphasis they put on skill. But either way, most redemption games out there, or video redemption, I call them redemption for short, they're just so shallow that they're oftentimes pretty forgettable. And they might be fun in short bursts, but again, there's just not a lot of depth to them. And so having 12 mini games instead of just one game looks like it could add some extra depth. And it's also interesting on the controller for this, where it has this spinner button hybrid. It also has a game board, an illuminated game board built into the control panel to show you progress. So that's all pretty interesting, and so we'll have to see what it's like in person. And then the other game that I discovered while poking around the Sega website, it looks like been announced about the same time. This is a video basketball game. Now, it's not a video game in the sense of like NBA Jam or something. It's more like one of those basketball arcade games that you come across in arcades, but it has a video screen backboard. And there are a few games that I've shown on the channel here that demonstrate that kind of idea. There was To the Net by Eunice, and Connect Four Hoops by Baytech, and Zombie Jam by Really Big Crane Company. And so this is Sega's take on the concept, where you play arcade basketball, but thanks to the video screen there, you have these goals that you aim for. And there's another one, Slam and Jam Ultra by LAI Games, that recently came along and also kind of similar. But what's interesting about Sega's version is that, I mean, on the single player it has these missions, which is pretty typical, but on the multiplayer it has 6 different challenges that you and the other player or players can choose to compete on, and that looks like that could add some great replay value. I mean, basketball arcade machines tend to have lots of replay value built into them already, even though they're very, very simple games, almost like a redemption game. People just love to play those basketball games and challenge themselves. I have a couple of basketball machines. They are nightmares as far as technical stuff goes. I've been trying to fix the pair that I have, but not been successful yet, and spent a bit of money on parts and whatnot. But anyways, that's for this one. It will be interesting to see Sega's take on it. One thing that I think that would be more interesting if Sega tried it would be to add some character to it, whether that's coming up with their own characters or applying one of their old licenses to it. And I mentioned this on the blog. It could be interesting if they did like a House of the Dead video arcade basketball, or maybe Outrun or Golden Axe, or Pengo, or whatever. I'm sure there's a way that if you're creative enough that of a game designer, that you could come up with something that would be fresh and unique and fascinating. Of course, if they did House of the Dead, that might be a little too close to that Zombie Jam game that I mentioned, but still, there's lots of possibilities, I suppose, in the future for what that holds. But anyways, that is the quick news for now. Lots of Sega stuff recently. I imagine soon we will be hearing more about some Raw Thrills stuff, as well as I believe they're going to be announcing their next game soon. I suppose as a quick thing for Raw Thrills, they did just announce on Twitter today that the Cruise and Blast Switch port is now permanently $19.99, $20. But I heard today from an arcade operator that he was in the process of ordering a Cruise and Blast arcade machine, a couple of them, and they were trying to raise the price dramatically on those, and I guess he was able to keep the price he was originally told, but otherwise it sounds like Cruise and Blast are going to be very, very expensive machines from here on out. A lot of that's just due to the various issues plaguing the industry with shipping container costs and inflation costs and all that. But where Cruise and Blast used to be $7,500 a game, he was saying it was somewhere around $10,000 now, so it's quite a jump. on that. And so I'm glad I got my cruisins years ago before all that hit. But unfortunately, that's just going to be affecting game prices across the board. And so I'm also not sure how much this Jumanji game or the Allstars Basketball game costs. Probably be finding out sooner than later, but either way, those are some of the new things coming to the business. So thanks for watching, and comment below on what else you would like to see, if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about from the arcade business, and we'll catch you on the next video.